Hello, I'm Ward Zischke, and I am the historian of the 88th Readiness Division. And I'm not just the historian for the division. I help Army Reserve units in our 19-state footprint with their historical programs, their annual histories, their history of their units, their lineage, documents, artifacts, all that stuff I help units out with. So today I'd like to speak with you about Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, which happened 35 years ago. In fact, today the ground offensive of February 1991 was going on. So if you remember it, it means you're old. So hopefully you can not be too upset about that. So anyway, what I've got here is just, of course, the liberation of Kuwait. That was the reason for the offensive. But I have these books out just to some buzzwords that you may have heard back then. Or if you read about that, about the war, you hear New World Order. Another one here is CNN. The rise of CNN when they started using mobile satellite. You had mobile satellites and you could get live feeds of the action going on. Of course, the action was kind of limited because they had what they called pools for the PAO people. So it was hard to get around and so forth. Of course, it's known as the Gulf War. And now I've got through with that. What I'd like to do is talk to some certain individuals who are wearing some certain patches. So anyone here wearing the 86th ARCOM patch? And also the 83rd ARCOM patch? Oh, okay. It's the 86th Training Division and the 83rd RTEC. And there's also an 88th ARCOM. So back then, when the Gulf War kicked off, I shouldn't say war, it wasn't a war yet, it was August 8th, 1990. Of course, Saddam Hussein had done the invasion of Kuwait on the 2nd of August. Well, on the 8th of August is when the United States met with the Saudis and Operation Desert Shield began. That was to shield Saudi Arabia from a possible Iraqi invasion. So what happened then, of course, there was reserve call-ups. Of course, this is going to be the largest call-up of reservists since the Korean War. So the United States, the Army Reserve units in the United States were divided up into a series of what they called Army Reserve Commands, or ARCOMs. There were 20 of them. Okay, you had the 88th that had units in the state of Minnesota and Iowa. You had the 86th ARCOM, which had units in Wisconsin and Illinois. And then you had the 83rd ARCOM, which was Ohio. And ARCOMs were a little different than the Army Reserve units today. One of the things is the ARCOMs had such things as psychological and civil affairs units. So the ARCOMs had those types of units. Also, they had combat arms units. Yes, they did. The Army Reserve hadn't gotten rid of its combat arms units yet. So usually that was in the form of 8-inch or 155 artillery pieces. And now with the 88th, we had the 205th Separate Infantry Brigade, and they had 105 howitzers. And the ARCOMs also had a series of schools called U.S. USRF, so United States Army Reserve Forces schools. These schools would come here to Fort McCoy and other places across the United States to give MOS training, because these units had to get trained up, some of them. What I'd like to do before I really get into all the equipment is, where can you find more information? I know it's a lot easier now because with AI and with our computer systems. By the way, Desert Storm is known as the last paper war. Yes, it was the last paper war. There were computers, there was email, but it was at echelons above reality, up at the highest levels of government and academia. And it didn't reach far, and you couldn't send much. So one of the things is, if you see any of these types of books around the Reserve Center, there was a series of books written about, and this one is reservists in the Army Medical Department. But they have the MPs, psychological operations, all sorts of things. Another good source is the ARCOMs were under a series of armies. There was no USARC yet. It was starting to come online, but it wouldn't actually be totally fully mission capable until 1992. So anyway, the states in this area, the units I've mentioned were under the 4th Army. And so the 4th Army came about, covered this area, Minnesota through Ohio in 1984. So if you ever see 4th Army, you'll notice that it's going to be from basically 1984 to 1991. But this is the report put out by the 4th Army. Talks all about the reserve component, Army Reserve component, being mobilized for Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. There's also the Twice the Citizen books. So this is what, you've seen these before?
They look like the old Bibles that they put in all the hotels at the time.
Yes. Well, this is kind of like the Bible of the Army Reserve from 1908 to 1995. So it has really a lot about Desert Shield, Desert Storm units, Army Reserve units. And this is the dust cover that comes with it. And then there's a reprint, so that I distribute out. I didn't write it, no, but I do distribute it. So if you see that, you probably know I've been there. So I really like this map because it shows the how the units, the major units involved. Notice that there's French and there's British units, along with Arab units. Now they made them all Saudi Arabian with the flag, but you had Syria and Egypt and so forth. And that shows that classic Hail Mary left hook that was done to defeat the Iraqis. Of course, at that time, we had an advantage over the Iraqis because we had the Magellan system, which is GPS, satellites, so we could actually know where we're at. Some other things you might see in your reserve center is these plaques. And I have to actually return this plaque to the unit. What happened is the building inactivated and the unit moved, and now they're not in Washington, Iowa, they're in Utah, so I got to send them their plaque. But you'll see these are standard plaques for lots of units. So, ARCOMs. the 88th ARCOM flag. And one thing you'll notice that there are no campaign streamers on this flag. Now later, when we were the 88th RSC, after 2008, we had the streamers. That's because the lineage was given back to the 88th. So your units like the 86th and the 83rd, or 86th, 83rd, okay, your ARCOM flags should have no streamers on them. However, many of the ARCOMs didn't quite understand that or didn't want to understand it. So you'll see the streamers from World War II on those flags. So, yeah, see, ARCOMs were supposed to be temporary. They were TDA. The headquarters didn't deploy. So they said, you don't get the lineage. Now, the ARCOMs stayed around for 28 years. So, oh yes. This is the Saudi Arabian flag. So all of our staging didn't happen in Kuwait like we do today. We couldn't do it back in Desert Storm and Desert Shield because there was Iraqis there. So I had to stage out of the port of Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. Whoops, we don't do that anymore. We finally pulled them out. So some other things that are kind of interesting. Might be able to, okay, who recognizes that? What's that? Yes, yes, so this is the TA1 voice-activated telephone, and that was a 312 that I was activating with it. Of course, here's the carrying case here. Now, one of the things with Desert Storm is it's happened so long ago, people don't realize sometimes the improvisation that needed to be done. So when I've done these programs, by the way, I'll get down with it later. So it worked in rehearsal. Anyway, so this is the M16A1. So even though the Army had gone to the M16A2, which I will show you in a minute, it can't, it's on the floor. Anyway, many Army Reserve units did deploy with the M16A1. When I've done these programs and carry this one around, I've had some people, that's wrong, they were using the M16A2. It's like, nope. So, by the way, when I do yellow ribbons and do this, I am always have to talk with the hotel security. By the way, this is a rubber duck. You are safe.
And the airport security has that?
I don't take them. If I'm going by plane, I pick something other to do. I usually do Desert Storm in February, because that's when the ground war was. So this is, of course, the M16A2, which is kind of fun with the newer soldiers because they haven't seen it. They have the carbine version. So Desert Storm, one of the things, there's 84,000 Army reservists called up for the Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and this is the U.S. Army Reserve painting right here. So this painting was commissioned years ago, and you'll see it around. One of the things I'd like to point out is right here is a woman. So when Desert Storm happened, this was the first big call-up of women to go to a combat area. And so it raised a lot of, it was controversial at the time. And of course, the M17 gas mask. We were really afraid that Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis were going to use chemical warfare. They had used it before. And so we were very nervous about that. Now this is the old-time mop suit. Later, and so you saw two types of mop suits in the war. You had the plain green ones, and then you had a camouflaged version. This would protect you for 6 hours. The camouflaged version would protect you for 24 hours. And if you cut the liner out of it to make it less hot, then it wouldn't protect you at all. But that was a trick people did in training. They'd cut the liner out and so forth. And here's another kind of interesting thing. This gas mask here, it's an Israeli gas mask. So people said, well, why do you have an Israeli gas mask? Remember, during the war, Saddam Hussein was shooting Scud missiles into Israel. And he was hoping the Israelis would retaliate and then the coalition would fall apart. They didn't. But also a lot of your reporters and stuff, you'd see them wearing these gas masks too. And then this is an Iraqi helmet. It looks like the US M1 helmet, but it has no steel shell. It's just like a resin. It's more for show than anything. Now, Desert Storm was also the combat debut of the MRLS, the Multiple Rocket Launch System. And what I've drawn on here, crudely, because I'm not an artist, is this is the coalition symbol. So you'll see the coalition vehicles will have this symbol. And this was very important because, like our allies, the Arabs, they were using T-72 tanks and other stuff like that. So we had to make sure that they weren't Iraqi and so forth. Of course, the M1 tank and the M2 Bradley, their combat debut, again with the coalition symbols. By the way, these are kind of nice too because, again, I said it was the last paper war. So now you can bring this stuff up on the computer with all sorts of details and stuff. But back then you had to hold it up for class. All right, what tank is this? Well, that's an M60 tank. You are a no-go at this station. Remember, you have to have the knife hand. And there's another expletive you could add to it for emphasis, but I won't do that here. This is a, Desert Storm era MRE. When you see these dark pouches like that, that is that's the MRE. At that time, they were dry. I mean, this stuff is all dried, and you had to have lots of water to it. They found that doesn't work too well because you had to load so much water. So, here's a little bit of a macabre artifact. Here, this is a body bag. I said, why are you bringing a body bag? Well, because there's lots of surplus body bags around, because Desert Storm, they were expecting about 20,000 casualties. They didn't expect that we were only going to lose like less than 200 soldiers in the war. So they ordered a lot of them, and then they didn't get to fill them, which is good. So that's why there were dire predictions about what was going to happen. And luckily for us, it didn't happen near that way. You've probably heard of the Vietnam Syndrome and how Desert Storm broke the Vietnam Syndrome. So one of the things, there was still Vietnam-era equipment used during Desert Storm. So this is a pair of jungle boots. So there weren't enough desert boots to go around. So you'll see, you would see soldiers wearing the jungle boots or even the old black boots. Now with our tan boots today, how do you tell if you get have a pair of Desert Shield, Desert Storm era boots? For some reason, the sole turns this brown color over time. So this is obviously, well, 5.5, very small boot. By the way, we're in the commemorative area for Fort McCoy. And one thing is, they always talk about people being smaller years ago. Well, part of that comes is because what survives? The small sizes that most people can't wear. So that's why you'll see in a lot of museums all these really small sizes. And on the surplus market, you can pick up all sorts of stuff, but it's really small. Oh, so this right here is an M1 120 millimeter practice round. Same weight as the original, but this is not depleted uranium. So, by the way, depleted uranium, of course, is one of the things that they talk about that may have caused the Gulf War syndrome. Because as it shot through those enemy tanks, and we captured the enemy tanks, what are soldiers going to do? What would I do? Oh, I got to see this. So they'd crawl in there. Well, you've got some of the residue from the depleted uranium there. Time for a sip. So, now getting back to the 83rd, 86th, and 88th ARCOMs. So, now I know you don't like to be read to, so I'll try to paraphrase. I tried to select units that were deployed to Desert Storm, and not all of them came through Fort McCoy, even though Fort McCoy in the 4th Army area was the biggest mobilization platform. But I tried to also pick ones that were either still in existence today or had a very interesting story. So our first one is the 79th Quartermaster Company, Water Supply. First USAR unit to mobilize at Fort Benjamin Harrison. So the BRAC had not happened yet, so there was a lot more forts then that don't exist today. So what happened is we were expecting to have a war in Europe against the Soviet Union. Well, in Europe, there's plenty of water. So now we're going to the desert, and we need water purification units and units that can manufacture water. Okay, we'll go to the 79th Quartermaster Company. Well, of course, they were a low priority unit. So they had to, and it says they suddenly became a priority unit. Unfortunately, the 125 person unit was only 75 people strong. So of course, and they had to do the emergency MOS qualification units done by United States Army Reserve Forces schools, who used to teach everything. That's another story in itself. Here is another unit. Now this one is from the 86th ARCOM. By the way, quick story on the ARCOMs. So when the 83rd ARTEC, when they became the 83rd ARTEC, and I saw the soldiers running around the post with that patch on, I said, you know, what are these guys doing with the 86th ARCOM patch on? And then I, of course, got it figured out. Anyway, so the 395th Ordnance Company of Appleton, Wisconsin, of course, it went to Fort McCoy. what was interesting about the ordnance units is the ordnance units of the Army Reserve were some of the last to leave theater. And this is the reason for it. So what happened is they had the ground war, which began on the 24th of February. Well, 100 hours later, it was over. The ceasefire had been declared on the 28th, early on the 28th of February. Well, what had happened is everyone had gotten all this ammunition issued to them, and they got it ready to fire it off, which means they were ripping up the pallets and tearing off all the other stuff. Well, okay, and throwing it away. Well, they fight the war, and it's over. It's like, oh, okay, well, pack it up. With what? So also there was a lot of enemy ammunition laying around that had to be policed up. So the ordnance units were some of the last to leave theater. And so the 395th is one of them. They've moved out of Appleton, but they're still in Wisconsin. And one of the things I do is I help Army Reserve units with their reunions. So I'll bring all my stuff and collect documents and things and photographs from them and then share my stuff with them. And I've been able to do that with the 395th Ordnance Company of the 86th ARCOM. Another interesting unit, this one is no longer with us, and this is the 88th ARCOM, is the 452nd General Supply Company. It was out of Winthrop and Worthington, Minnesota. Now what's interesting about that unit is it had been deployed before to the, 4 minutes, yeah. We're going to time, not to standard, so sorry about that. And so the 452nd was deployed to the Republic of Vietnam in 1968. It was one of 35 units, Army Reserve units, called up for the Vietnam War. Now, what happened is after Vietnam, the Army realized, no, we got to use the reserves. So that's when you get the total force policy of 1973. And the Gulf War was the first big use of that policy because they called up all these Army Reserve units. But anyway, the 452nd was called up. What's interesting is they were called up on Thanksgiving Day in November. That was their first day of mobilization. The 88th ARCOM called up 5 units. So they actually had the SRP on Thanksgiving Day in Worthington, Minnesota. Well, in other places, but you never think of, going to call them up on Thanksgiving Day. So happy Thanksgiving. By the way, I was going to bring my IBM typewriter like they would use, because that's what they had, these big wide typewriters. But it's at Fort Snelling, so I'll have to bring it next time. Let's see. I've gotten the 83rd, and let's see if I have one more unit that might be interesting to just, because we could go, for the 88th ARCOM, you have the 477th Ambulance Company out of Duluth, Minnesota. And one of the things is their ambulances consisted of Humvees and Cut-Vs. So who here remembers the Cut-Vs? Yes. In fact, our DOL, now our G4, used to use them around the post here. So I'm running out of time, and I could go on forever. Is there any quick questions? So any other things I should say? We're on Teams, which I'm really happy about because it means that there's other people watching this and probably critiquing, so the comment section, I don't know if I want to look at it or not. Yes?
I did want to mention we do have an actual Desert Storm veteran with us. It's Dwayne here. He was here. He trained with the 107th Maintenance Company.
Okay.
Do you have any with the 107 or the Wisconsin Guard?
Yes, quite a bit. I don't think how much time I got? 1 minute. Okay, we'll have to do this. I got a great story about that unit. There's a lot of stuff about that unit, and I'll tell you why. But, all right, let's see. I guess we're out of time. Oh, got to have my toy here. Post-Desert Storm toy, you know. So, yep. Oh, but yeah, please come up, look at this stuff. You can handle it. You know, encourage anybody you can to come by. I'll be here all day. So, thank you so much for your time.